Hi everyone, welcome back. This is our last session of the Rack and Stack. I hope that you've enjoyed the content so far. We've had some incredible speakers and really appreciate them sharing their expertise and time with us. One housekeeping note, if you are in the lobby and you want to interact or be able to ask questions during this Q&A, there should be a purple join button. So you can click join and then it'll open a separate screen so you'll be able to interact and use chat and Q&A. I'll also be monitoring the lobby chat should you use that. And then this session is also being recorded. All of our sessions were recorded today, and we will be posting them on the VMUG YouTube, and you'll be getting an email with the links as well. So with that, I'll kick it over to you, Brad.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, thanks to our presenters today. We really appreciate the time that they put into this, and hopefully you found a lot of value in the conversations that we had. So we'll kick it off with the Q&A. We had some that came in earlier, but feel free to ask your questions, and this can be as interactive as you want to here. So Amy, one of the questions that I had for you was, you touched on it a little bit, but what kind of activity and demand from a data center business from an electrical perspective are y'all seeing? I guess better said is, do companies, do they focus just on data centers and that's like, hey, that's their niche and that's just what they go do? Or is it more of a, look at a contractor that does a little bit of everything, including data centers, if we've got people out there that might be building data centers or those kind of things? What kind of activities are you seeing around specifically data centers?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. From where our audience is at, is it's primarily you are this or that a little bit because most of our contracting companies are smaller. So the demand that's coming from those data centers is slightly challenging us to figure out, in some of these roles, how can they pivot and adapt? So usually it's a lot of our bigger contracting companies that have maybe multiple locations and multiple teams that they can work in that have more of that medium voltage ability to go out and seek out that work. So what we're finding is a lot of reacting to what is coming our way to say, maybe a data center is coming to the area. How can we be part of that team? I was actually surprised in some of my conversations out there that some of the work is being done by a mix. So it may not be like, hey, we're bringing in one electrical contracting company. It may be like, what labor do we have in the area? And it can be a combination of sorts. But predominantly what we're seeing is being a little bit reactionary right now to as those centers are coming versus seeking out just because of the size of many of our businesses.
And do the electrical contractors, are they still doing like the low voltage, the Cat 5, Cat 6, and the fiber and pulling all that inside the data center as well, in addition to just the straight up, AC/DC power?
You betcha. Yeah. And I think that's a lot I had kind of mentioned in my presentation, just the training. We have a lot of valuable modules around, low voltage training and things. And we're kind of looking at, how do we diversify that a little bit so that we've got more of that mix of a training that's available. But we're kind of doing all of it. And hopefully can do all of that. I think we're a little bit reluctant to lean too much into the specialization for some of our contracting companies that it starts to limit their ability should the data center swoop in and swoop out, so to speak, that, it doesn't kind of derail our ability to continue to grow and have opportunities for the contractors.
All right, great. And so, Jeff, you mentioned bin radius, and we had somebody asking more details about, what exactly that is, and kind of to the same point of what Amy was talking about, is there, certified Panduit contractors that know what bin radius is and they know how to do all this to make sure once the cable's in there, especially with fiber, that it's going to all run and it's certified and those kind of things. So if you could explain a little bit more about bin radius and then just the certification process for somebody to install Panduit cabling.
Okay. Well, let's discuss spin radius as regards to fiber. Fiber is made by drawing two pieces of glass, and they come out as one round piece. The center of that glass is the core, and it'll have a certain index of refraction. And then we put a glass around that centerpiece that is a higher index of refraction. The end result is light is lazy. It doesn't want to go fast. So when it comes out of the middle and it hits the interface between the faster glass and the slower glass, it bends. You can see this if you've ever been fishing when you were little and you stuck the fishing rod in the water and it looked like it was bent. You know, that's the interface between air and water. The same thing happens in the glass. When I make a piece of glass and I lay it out flat, that light will always stay into the center. It will not bleed out. If we start to bend the fiber greater than a certain radius, we will change that angle of incidence of the light inside hitting the outside, and light will bleed out. So we will lose the light source and the strength will decrease. So there's also glass is a non-flexible material, right? So as I start to bend it, I put the inside in compression and the outside into tension, and it will create small micro fractures. So bend radius is very important. Typically, we want to see somewhere around 1 inch for multi-mode, but in these data center cables, we're going up to 2 and 4 inches
Mm.
because we're having them parallel ribbon glued together, and it's easier to stress them when you start putting them in. So you have to worry about the bend radius. That's why it's important to have a certified partner that knows what they're doing when it comes to installation. Panda has a bunch of contractors who are certified to put in the fiber and the copper, and I mean many of them are independent electrical contractors. Okay, so there's a lot of crossover in this community here. Uh, but you will find that they're certified in putting in low voltage cabling, and then there is a second level of certification that is strictly for data centers. And if you're looking at someone to help you design their pathways and stuff like that, you'll be looking for that person that has the extra level of certification for data centers.
Great. Sounds good. So this question is really for anybody here because I think y'all all have experienced this. But what's your take on raised floor plenum and bottom up rack cooling versus maybe hot roll, cold roll? Or I was actually in a data center that didn't have any of that and it was above the air and it just was freezing in there all the time and air blowing like crazy. But what's your take on the raised floor plenum and cooling from underneath?
I'll start out with that. We see approximately 60% of the data centers we're in, we still see on a raised floor. Any of the larger hyperscale guys that are doing AI are moving away to that, going to a slab, but they're also transferring from a hot aisle, cold aisle orientation coming up from underneath the floor to more of a contained system where they're containing the hot air. So we're seeing, due to the weights requirements of some of the cabinets, we're seeing about a 60-40 split. It's nice in the enterprise. If you can get away with the raised floor, it makes things look a lot easier. It's easier for you to manage that. But as you see demands come up, you may see departure of that into containment systems.
And that makes sense. It's a good point about the weight of the floor. I mean, that raised floor is going to have a limit. If it's a slab, it can go a lot heavier. Dave, curious, what's your data centers? Are they raised floor or contained aisles?
The one we got in Dallas now, it is raised floor and it's also contained at the same point. We
Okay.
actually, after we had moved everything down there, then we had another project to basically move from the data center we were in. Stayed in the same data center, but we had to go into a different cage. So we got a whole new cage built out, and now the cold area is in the center, which is all completely contained, and then the hot air just comes out the side or the backs of the racks. So it's a little different than what we were used to, but it's basically what the data center mandated us to have now. So it's got a little like sliding glass door you open, walk in there, then you can do all your stuff in the racks, and then all the heat's going out the back.
Nice. Yves, if you're working with a company that's building out a brand new data center, does that conversation about contained rolls or how they're cooling it, does that come into play when it comes to TCO?
No, not really that much because in most cases they have planned that before, but we are seeing more and more companies step away from the, let's say, classic raised floor scenario because That was good as long as you only needed a certain amount of cooling. But with the modern infrastructure, and again, it feels a bit like we are seeing repeating scenarios. We had something similar many, many years ago when the blade centers actually started, and everybody, the blade vendors, were telling people, "It's like, hey, you can get away with so much more compute power in the same rack," up until everybody figured out it's like it's more heavy and it's actually more heat you are generating, and all of a sudden the racks were only half full. I think people have learned from that, but it's also overall people are looking into new approaches on how they are going to manage and handle heat at the same point in time. Currently, I'm actually watching a few new data center projects down in the Middle East. And over there, it's an even more bizarre scenario because when you think about the summer temperatures they have, it's you cannot actually just pump air from the outside in because that is already hotter than what you want to have in the data center in the first place. And so they are actually approaching it completely different. But on the other side, they have an advantage. They have more or less endless energy. So they are very often taking completely different approaches on how to do things in actually really building more like contain. Really, we are coming back to the, let's say, old container scenarios. So they build massive halls and just throw containers which are completely contained in within themselves and have their own air condition, and then they just have huge pipes going to the outside to present there to move the hot air out, and then they are basically, with the fact that they push the hot air out, they are pulling in the other air and trying to cool it at the same point in time. There are some interesting concepts, especially in the desert areas, going on how they build data centers.
I can only imagine, and not sure I want to, but anyway, they're smart. They can figure it out. Dave, question for you. When you were relocating the networks, did you use VMware 8CX and any stretch VLAN features? And if so, what were the chief considerations and challenges that you encountered?
We didn't use any HCX. It was something I looked at initially, but when this first kicked off and we were told you get to do this with zero budget, use the tools you have. So that's when I immediately went to my network guys and like, hey, can you figure this out? And that's how they come up with the idea of it was, I guess the simplest way for me to explain it, because I'm not a true network engineer, would be they did a stretch layer two from the two data centers and then just moved the gateways down to the Dallas data center once we had migrated all the machines down there. So there was a brief period of time when the machines came back up where for gateway and that kind of information, they were still reaching across our 10 gig pipes back up to the Chicago area until they made that final cutover. So HCX
Nice.
would have been nice to be able to utilize that a little more, but when they tell you no budget and then you basically put an ultimatum of like, well, we can do this, but if you want to give us more downtime, then it'll be easier. But if you want less downtime, we need like whatever, I don't know, $25,000 to buy more SRM licenses. So that's what they ended up giving us. So
Brad,
Hey, you made
you
it work. That's all that
yeah,
matters.
we made it
Brad,
work. It's always cost constrained. So do what you can with what you get.
Brad, you brought up an excellent issue that a lot of people are having, and that is as we go into these Gen 7, Gen 8, and looking forward to Gen 9 directors, uh, we're starting to see a lot of different cards come out. So now we're seeing cards come out with SN connectors, and the vast majority of us have all of our network set up for LC connections. So what do we do when we transition from a card that was 48 that now goes into, 96 and it's got SN connectors. So, or it goes into 72 SN connectors. So we're seeing a lot more replication where we replicate the SAN director in another cabinet and do all the patching from there, where we're able to just have a few cables coming from the SAN director instead of, 256 patch cords. We end up with a scenario where we end up with 1/8 of that.
Hmm.
So we're starting to see, particularly with the Gen 7 cards, people really looking at making sure that we're not trying to do our changes at the SAN director and that we're making those in a replicated panel. So
Good point. So in your session, you mentioned when capacity planning becomes folklore. So could you elaborate a little bit more on what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good part out of that was really all about the ugly things you can see in the data centers, and especially when you see companies grow and you have budget constraints, is people come up with all kinds of crazy ideas on how to add additional capacity to your infrastructure. And if no one is there to actually stop that, you basically have a multitude of all kinds of different systems, services, and everything else. And from that point on, yeah, capacity planning really becomes more like a step dance whatsoever scenario. And you're actually not trying to step on anything, to not break anything, while at the same point in time, you're still trying to grow. And in many cases, yeah, there is no real good way to how to solve it. It becomes really more like a dance with the devil in trying to figure out how we can actually make this work. And we have seen this in all kinds of scenarios, and it's not something where I would say is like it's always the small and medium-sized companies which are in a bad fashion there. We have seen the ugly also on some of the very, very large data centers, especially when you look at companies who have been growing a lot through acquisitions, because not all the time is all of that immediately cleaned up. It's like I only met one larger CSP in the US who basically at one point in time says, it's like, whenever we do an M&A, it's 12 months period until it's adopting our infrastructure planning. Because if we can't get it done within 12 months, we know it's going to still be there in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Dave, you mentioned you had a new acquisition attitude in your data center moves. So my question to you is, were you or was IT involved in that from the beginning of the, hey, we might be acquiring this company, or was it just dumped on you at the end after all the paperwork had been signed?
There were signs that this had been something that was talked about a while before it all came to fruition, because it just happened to be this company moved into the same data center we were in. They also moved into the same office building in downtown Chicago we were in before most people knew about the acquisition was going to happen. So it was a little bit of a shock, but thankfully it was only a 50 VM environment, so it wasn't that much of a shock to take on. I mean, their whole environment was smaller than our dev environment, so I think that was the only saving grace was it was tiny. And at the time, because everybody has an extra pure storage array just sitting around doing nothing in your data center. The timing just happened to work out where it was kind of ridiculous. I'm like, hey, let's just physically move this, and my bosses were like, wait, what? You want to do what now? You want to just go? I'm like, yeah, we'll just carry it from our room into their cage, hook it up, and it'll be all good. So coming back with no budget and being creative with your solutions.
Well, there you go. And
But
always nice to have that extra
it
array
was,
around. But I'll correct you. I think it's Everpure now to just,
yes, ever
be
pure.
technical.
That is right. They did change. I'm
That's a
still
whole
stuck
nother
with
webinar. So Dave, you mentioned about power planning and power capacity planning. You also mentioned some Cisco tools that helped you out with that. So I want to start with you on that, but I'm also curious, Amy and Jeff, if y'all had any comments on, are there tools out there for people to prepare for what kind of power consumption they're going to need for not only where they're at now, but where they might be going in the next 3, 6, 12 months?
Yeah, Cisco's Power Tool. It's a nice calculator they've got on their website. I'm pretty sure they have it for switches. I know they have it for the infrastructure for UCS, where you basically build out what you have, chassis, blades, um, and you get granular down to like actual model numbers of CPUs, model numbers of DIMMs that are in there if you've got hard drives. So you build your blades, put all the blades in there, and then add it up, and it'll show you how much power you're going to draw. You can use a slider on there to say if you're running like 80% all the way up to 100%. So we just kicked the sliders all up to 100% and figured out, all right, how can we max this out? What is our max draw from the data center per rack? If we had another chassis in here, are we going to hit that if we go 100% or not? So it took a lot of playtime with that and working with their Cisco account team. They were amazing to help us figure that out and actually pointed us at the tool. Talking with our Everpure team as well to find out what the arrays are pulling to make sure that we're not going to overload other racks. And we had been pretty fortunate that we had a few empty racks in that data center just from retiring some old equipment and whatnot. So we definitely had the capacity for power. It was just more of, do our racks have the capacity for power, or are we going to have to buy more PDUs or something like that? So account teams are great when they can point you to tools like that. So
Brad, something that's important along this subject is what we saw as a result of COVID. Uh, we've seen through the development of COVID prior to the supply chain consolidation caused by COVID, we would see switch manufacturers have maybe 16, 17 different power supplies that they were carrying, and you would have their entire line kind of with the custom power supply. Now we're seeing them come down to like a silver, a gold, and a platinum, or a titanium, however they want to call it. Uh, but they have a lot less power supplies fitting a lot greater spectrum of switches. And it's possible that you could get a switch that will never draw the power from the power supplies that you're putting in it. It's just not capable of utilizing that much power. If you do not use the switch manufacturer's power tools that you have, and Dell has one, Juniper has one, Arista has one. The vast majority of them are going that way. Okay. If you do not use those tools, you will end up way overbuilding your infrastructure to support a power that you'll never use. And you will have stranded capacity there, which will really, really make Amy's people happy because you will way overbuild, but you'll never utilize what you've got. So it's very important that you use those tools. And it's because of what grew out of COVID. We've seen everybody consolidate the power supplies to just a few to cover a lot.
yeah, we just bought some new Cisco gear, and we were actually hung up receiving it because of power supply shortages, which are coming back. But yeah, I think one of our racks in our Elk Grove data center before we shut it down, I had 5 Cisco UCS chassis, and we were pulling, God, probably 17 kilowatts on average out of just one chassis. So when you already have an idea of how much power you have and what you're using and trying to find it at another data center. So it was a lot of conversations, just everybody being on top of things and keeping that communication going to make sure we're not going to trip any breakers or blow anything up or burn anything down because that'd be bad.
One, one of the issues with AI is you start looking at an AI server that has 6 power supplies. And normally we would go, hey, that's great. I got 3 primary, 3 secondary, right? 3 redundant. But they run in a 4+1 or a 4+2 or a 5+1 scenario. So there is no redundant. You have to have the power. So there's a lot of different things happening on the power now that you need to really consider as you move forward.
Yeah,
And
Jeff,
I,
and I know you ran out of time a little bit on your session. I'm sorry, go ahead, Amy, finish out that thought.
No, I was just going to kind of piggyback that and say, we've talked a lot on our side of it, even how we're preparing and training, knowing that sometimes it's like, I need this skill, I need this done. I'm going to train you on how to do this thing so that you can go. And we're trying to prioritize to make sure that we're putting people out there that have been not just taught on one system or one tool, that they understand. So it's definitely a priority of ours, and there's a balance in there trying to find of like, how can I teach you this one thing quickly so we can get out there, but not wanting to pigeonhole. So if someone goes, onto a site and it is a different setup or a different tool or something they're unfamiliar with, that we've kind of set them up to be able to do that.
Very good. So, Jeffrey, I know you kind of ran out of time and talk about the AI demands that y'all are seeing, but if you could briefly just kind of touch on that, you kind of did with the power supply there, but anything else that folks need to be aware of?
Uh, I I'll give you a power supply example of a organization here in, a example. We have an organization here in Atlanta who is trying to refurbish a data center from an enterprise banking system. They want to turn it into host AI uh, servers. They had to quadruple the power. You would think that in downtown Atlanta, that's not a big deal. That was an 11-month wait to be able to get
Wow.
the power put in. So we see that. people needing to plan in advance. You're not doing it day one. The demands are so high. We're seeing, based on what the Magnificent Seven is doing, okay, you could run into delays on getting the fiber based on uh, what they're doing. The X data center, every fiber manufacturer wants to point out that, hey, the X data center in Memphis that has so many megawatts is run over our fiber. Well, the true fact of the story is it's run over everybody's fiber because their demand circum 7 different manufacturers. They took full capacity of 7 guys and still couldn't meet the demand. So there was tremendous requirement for some of these time crunches. So you're going to see timing and allowances. The much larger density AI factories are actually using connectors that are on allocation. And even as I told you guys, a top 3 manufacturer of the data center fiber, we have to go to the manufacturer of those ferrules and give a written letter that we're doing it for one of those guys to even get the material because they're on allocation. So there's a lot of stuff out there that if you're following the AI and it's like, hey, I want to do it like Meta, or I want to do it like uh, Apple or Cisco, there's a high chance that you will not be able to simply because the components they're using are on allocation. So yeah, it's a big thing right now. So we're seeing shortages in copper cable. We're seeing shortages in fiber across the board, and this is industry wide. It's not just one manufacturer; it's industry wide. We're starting to see lead times grow on all of that. The war is not going to help with the fact that the availability of plastics is slowing down. So.
Yeah, we're hearing the same thing, with all our strategic partners, and Southwire is one we work close with, so they're very in tune with that, hearing the same thing. Those prices are not slowing down, and something for us to prepare for.
Yves, you talked about in your session about, I think it was one that, every server had a name and they're all configured a little bit differently. And obviously, a big push is for people to adopt the cloud operating model. And I think a piece of that is more, to kind of go with what Joe Bagley would talk about. It's cattle versus pets kind of scenario. So is that a scenario? Because you touched on storage and not buying for exactly what you need. It's not necessarily lowest cost, but those kind of things. But where I'm going with this is like, when is it going to be more just get the white boxes, get the cheapest thing that you can, and the software above it is what's really going to be, running all that to help reduce your TCO and also just ease of maintenance. You mentioned about being able to, if you've got like for like, you can just swap out things if something goes down to keep things up and running while a new server comes in.
I think when we realistically look at all of that is for the last, let's say, 15 years, we have been implementing hypervisors and virtualization. And let's face it, if most of the companies who are currently using any kind of hypervisor, whether it's VMware or anything else, would still be doing all of that with physical, directly bare metal systems, they would be in a total nightmare scenario. So in reality, most companies have done that already by moving away from directly running something bare metal towards running it in either containers, Kubernetes, or inside of a virtual machine. And we are in many, many cases giving the underlying hardware far too much, I would say, power of being independently different from each other versus just creating really a building block approach. The reason for that has also been up until the last couple of years, I think, is that really building a private cloud platform like what we can do now with modern cloud foundation platforms or the latest releases and stuff like that has just been highly complex. And let's face it, consulting companies like mine have done a good business out of actually building all of these scenarios where you build a purpose-built clusters, one for high performance, one for dev test, one for databases, one for this, one for that. And as much as people are always hammering on one or the next vendor about their licensing scenarios, it's like we have now seen it all, whether it's database vendors, hypervisor vendors, or something else. It's like licensing models are changing over time. So the more you try to build individual solutions for point problems, the more complex your infrastructure get. And let's face it, when I started in IT over 30 years ago, there was a huge difference whether you were actually using HPE, Lenovo, Cisco, or anything else from a server perspective. Reality is, in most cases nowadays, the difference between the actual servers has become minor. For the majority of customers, if we have really high performance customers who are deep into AI, and with deep into AI is potentially more the scenarios which Jeff has been talking about, where you really have companies which have hundreds of these hosts and massive deployments. That's a different beast. That is something where you're building for a different platform. But let's face it, 90% of these companies out there are not necessarily there yet. They might come there sooner or later because they figure out that they need AI and everything else. But reality is, if I can build like a public cloud provider, if I can build like an AWS, OVH, and Rackspace, and we have worked with more or less all of them, is reality is what you see again and again is like the only reason why they have a different hardware platform in many cases, especially when it comes to virtualized, is just because, hey, they bought 5,000 of this, they now need 5,000 next, and it's a different platform, so they build it up like that. It's for the majority of customers, it's nowadays possible to get away with, let's say, like 2, maybe 3 different types of clusters. Everything else might look better in the first place, but especially, as I said, it's like scenarios like being able to, hey, we just need 2, 3, 4 more hosts out of this cluster into that cluster. That is going to be a lot easier if you have the same platform below it, if you have the same infrastructure below it, and especially when we now look at modern scenarios like with VCF, where you really actually just use switch and swap between clusters. We just lately reviewed a customer, and whereas the original deployment had more or less every cluster directly assigned to rack, over time, this has now become a complete Tetris scenario. But it doesn't matter for them because in reality, all of them have more or less the same infrastructure. And in reality, it's also when we come back to the to Joe's scenario, is it doesn't matter anymore which physical server in which rack is actually now going to host your database over your application server over anything else. It's no longer a problem. Licensing is a different topic, but even that is solvable by now. So I think we will see more and more companies do that, especially as we see more and more demand from companies now moving out of the public clouds back into private clouds, especially for the AI story, because they want to get control about their data back. And even when we talk about this data scenario, I mean, I come out of Europe and we always tend to come up with all kinds of crazy scenarios on why you need to have and own your data. Reality is I have 2 logistics customers in our customer base, and they are more or less dominating in one country like 98% of the overall business. Their biggest fear is not that Amazon or Microsoft actually can actually access their data and train their AI system with it, and that their other competitor would see that. Their biggest fear, and I heard similar stories from different CIOs, their biggest fear in that scenario is that a new startup shows up, takes the information from both companies because of a data leak in one of the AI platforms and actually builds a more efficient company because they don't have to redo all the mistakes the others have done. They don't have to live with processes and procedures and all the things which have been built up because these companies are, one of them is like, I think, 100 years old, the other is 80 years old. They have so much legacy with them. And if you were now to actually come up as a startup, take the knowledge of both of these companies and build a new company, you would basically beat them to death with the advantages you have in the market. And that is what I hear again and again is like the fear most companies, especially in Europe, but I hear that in other territories as well. The fear is not about that the direct competitor, which they very well know gets to access to their data. The fear is something new is showing up because we hear all the stories about these wipe coding scenarios. You don't need SaaS applications anymore. You can just actually build that with an AI agent and stuff like that. I just was reading an interview the other day where people said it's like, yes, you can do that, but have fun with the next compliance check. That's the first problem. Or people actually building, there was a very good example where people were building complex and really nice looking web pages. And then they took Google and Bing to actually look at that web page and they only saw a black page. Because whatever the AI engines did build had no actually idea on what search engines or anything else would need, or what potentially blind people would need to see the content and all of these things. Graphically nice, everything nice on the front end, but it's the depth is missing still.
Interesting. Dave, I'm curious, was your data center that you did, was that a co-location facility or did you build your own?
No, we got out of that business years ago. We still kind of have one in our main office, but there's nothing actually running in it anymore. It just got too much work between maintaining AC units in it and then also a generator and having to make sure that's fueled and tested.
Yeah.
And it's just expenses that are better handled by somebody better equipped for it. So we just rent space from a big colo down in Dallas now. And we were doing the same thing up here in Chicago too at the time.
Yeah, so Amy, I'm curious, is there like some questions? So a lot of our members, they will go outsource their data center from somebody else, right? They'll go buy a couple of racks or whatever it is. So when they're interviewing and maybe doing due diligence on a couple different co-location providers, is there any best practices or things that they should be asking for to make sure that, yes, this data center provider is, prepared for the power needs of now and in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the good questions to ask, like I had mentioned, some of the work is being done kind of a matrix of different contractors working. So understanding kind of maybe who else is in that space, who else are you kind of working with if it becomes a bit of a team effort to do some of that. I think just being clear on the job, as well, knowing that we're kind of training as we're kind of building and doing this to understand where, some of that experience lies. I'm finding out, there are journeymen that are there versus some of it as apprenticeship. I mean, we're pro apprentices and want people to learn, but if it's a larger job, ensuring that there's a lot of, the journeyman level experience that's coming in and knowing that sometimes with those journeymen may be paired some apprentices, just kind of understanding and talking with that contractor on what kind of the makeup is and being clear on the level of the work so they can ensure that, they're getting the right people into the needs.
And is journeyman the highest level of an electrician?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a master electrician that you can factor into there. I think that is not a certification. It's a conversation that we have a lot on kind of how you scale for a journeyman. There is a journeyman test, and there is some states do have licensure around that, some don't. You will see that kind of flex a little bit and where it's easier to get some workforce. Those states I think that are putting in more of those parameters, unfortunately, then have those healthy safety barriers that are there, but sometimes can be a little bit of a more difficult path versus some of our areas where maybe licensure is a little more lax or, some of those things do vary. So it does play into it a bit. For us, we very much look at, that 4-year curriculum is our standard on training. And then in some states, you come out of that and can sit automatically for that journeyman test. So, again, if you're kind of unfamiliar, that might be a good question to ask of your electrical contracting company. They know the ins and outs on that to even educate yourself on, just kind of what skill and experience workers you're getting.
I definitely think that's a good question to ask about, certification and what kind of process. You mentioned 4 years. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I mean, that's a lot of time invested in that. And Yves, I know you touched on this earlier too, but about Broadcom nights. Broadcom nights are not just VMware nights. There's also nights that are all on the chip side and everything else of Broadcom. I know you're a VCDX too, and a lot of our members are needing help with that. And I think that's a good question to ask as well. But I would like for you to touch a little bit. I think a lot of members still don't understand what the role of nights are and who they are. If you could just briefly kind of give an overview of that, because I see their importance growing in the Broadcom ecosystem. And obviously, you touched on Microsoft and all these other vendors that you work with. So, your expertise is not just, and your company's expertise is not just in VCF. It covers everything. And like we touched on earlier, we're all doing more than just VCF now.
Yeah, so first and foremost, no, yes, we have to deal with Microsoft from time to time, but my company purely is at the moment now a Broadcom only company, so we don't do anything else. But we cover more areas than just VCF with Broadcom, so that's a fact. So from a night perspective, what is Broadcom actually doing with the Nights program? And to a certain degree, I would say it's a bit of a VCDX further developed, but less on the design part, but more on the operations and a day-to-day business side. So a night in general needs to go through also a lot of certification, a lot of proof. And it's no longer for a VCDX in the old days, you had to write a very massive design. You basically wrote a design in a way which you would never do in real life. Let's face it. It's a bit like you're just overstretching it. It was far too detailed. No one would really do that in real life to that detail level. And with the NI program, I think they took a bit of a more realistic approach. So it's on the other side, you need to have at least 2 projects, and it's only limited currently to partners, which I questioned several times because I would argue that some customers would benefit from it as well. But the good part is the nights, like we have been just in Orlando, the nights are constantly being briefed on what's going to happen in the next few weeks, months, etc. They are under strict NDA, but they get many more insights into Broadcom. And also on the other end is Broadcom requires partners to have nights if they want to be able to do certain types of deliveries. So that is also, I think, a very good thing because that was a bit of an issue in VMware in the past. And this is currently what hits now a lot of partners, that they haven't invested that much in education. And by now, virtualization, or at least VCF, or if you go deep into one of the other areas, have become highly complex solutions. It's not something which you can just actually spin off and do and get it working. Yes, for small, but not necessarily for large. And so nights are really, it's a cross function from sales up until post sales, but they also can help customers if they have any specific questions because they have direct relationships into product management for their specific field and other areas. So if customers really run into issues, then nights can be helpful to actually escalate the situation in a certain scenario and really speak with the voice of the customer towards Broadcom and actually try to fix that. So overall, I think it's an important part. People are stressing it because you are required to actually redo your certifications every 2 years. And that's not only one. I just have been fighting through in Orlando, and I think I did 3 VCAPs. I did 3 VCPs just a couple of months ago. And that's not going to be good enough for me. I still have to present my live lab because that's also a requirement for every night. Every night needs to maintain a live lab. So if in theory, at any point in time, a customer would question me to do a demo, I should be able to do that from my live lab environment, which also means companies have to invest into their nights. So I think it's a good thing from a customer perspective. I also think it's a good thing from a partner's perspective because you finally need to decide, is Broadcom a primary vendor for you? Then you need to invest into it. And if you decide that it's not a primary vendor, then potentially, yeah, you might or you should not be on the primary front line. And let's face it, this is not something not many other vendors do as well. It's like if you want to do certain things with Oracle on their hardware side, if you want to actually get to a certain level on the Cisco side or anything else, it's like, yes, you can do a lot of that without certifications, but you are really not going to be competitive. So it's not something not any other vendor has been doing before. The program is a bit different, but overall, I think when you look at it from a customer perspective, I think the majority of customers will highly benefit from it. And I always only can encourage every partner to do similar as what we did. Is like every customer basically in our CRM has clearly a night assigned. So that does not mean that everyone gets one dedicated. I mean, they could get if they want to pay for it. But the good part with that is that night knows that customer much deeper than we could with a shared resource. And that actually ensures that there is shortened life cycle when it comes to problems.
Good. Well, thanks for that overview. All right, we're coming up on time here. Eric, is there any questions that came through?
We have not. You hit them all.
All right, perfect. Well, I just want to thank our presenters, Amy, Jeff, Yees, Dave. Appreciate y'all being here and part of this. And thanks for everybody who joined this. We will have this on our YouTube for y'all to look at later on. And if you are new to VMUG, go in and sign in and complete out your platform. And Eric, I'll hand it to you to close this out here.
Fantastic. I just have a couple housekeeping things to wrap us up. So, thanks again for joining our Rack and Stack event today. We were grateful to have you, and hopefully you learned something. Again, just thank you to our speakers. We couldn't do this without you. Appreciate all of the valuable insight that you brought and expertise. If you want to catch more content like this, VMUG is coming to a city near you. So we have just wrapped Amsterdam and Minneapolis, and we'll be in Toronto in the next couple weeks. We'll also be in Dallas in June, and then taking a little break for Explore, and then we'll hit the road again to be in Orlando. That's your QR code you can do to find how to register for that event or find more details. You can also find it at vmug.com. We will also be having a global virtual event if you like the virtual style or if the cities aren't close to you. Um, so you can go onto this QR code and you can register for that. It will be June 25th. We're very excited and can't wait to talk more about the content we'll have there. But there'll be some announcements in the next couple weeks that will make that very exciting. And then in conclusion, thank you for attending. You will get a survey in about an hour. If you can fill that out, it really helps us bring fresh, relevant content just like this to you here at VMUG, and we hope to see you at a future event. I did see a question come through about the YouTube link. You'll receive it by email, or you'll be able to find it at the VMUG YouTube later on today. So with that, we're going to end it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.